Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang, and joining me here in the studio is our panel of foreign journalists. Thank you for being here. Thank you for streaming us. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump met last week in the Vietnamese capital of Hanoi for their highly anticipated second summit. But the meeting came to an abrupt end after the two sides failed to reach an agreement. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to zoom in on the unexpected turns that led to the abrupt end of the summit and how the regional powers are reacting to those developments. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump met once again for the first time in 8 months following their historic bilateral summit in Singapore last June.
I think they'll be very successful. Great relationship. I think they're going to be very successful. We look forward to it. We both do.
모든 사람들이 반기는 그런 훌륭한 결과가 만들어질 거라고 확신하고 또 그렇게 되기 위해서 최선을 다하겠습니다.
When you have a good relationship, a lot of good things happen. So I can't speak necessarily for today, but I can say that just a little bit longer term and over a period of time, I know we're going to have a fantastic success.
이렇게 마주 걸어서 여기 베트남 하노이 와서 이틀째 지금 저 훌륭한 대화를 이어가고 있습니다.
However, the two leaders were unable to reach an agreement of any kind in their latest meeting.
Actually, it was a very productive 2 days, but sometimes you have to walk.
We asked him to do more. He was unprepared to do that.
How unexpected was this result?
For me, it was very, very unexpected because usually those summits are already pre-negotiated. So mostly it's just a staged act where people just sign the document and everything is already negotiated before. Obviously, that was not the case. There was some kind of gap that both sides could not bridge. And I know many colleagues of me told me that they expected any kind of outcome, but this outcome specifically was the least expected.
Right. Were you surprised as well?
Well, I was surprised, but not too surprised.
Okay.
As when you're dealing with North Korea and everything is possible and the history shows that. I wouldn't say that I expected it, but I was not surprised, I'd say so, yeah.
What about for you, Kelly? Was this possibility on the back of your mind leading up to the summit?
No, it totally blindsided me. I feel like, especially as I was watching the summit happen, Trump and Kim Jong-un were playing up the results that we were all expecting so much. I think there was a moment where Trump turned to reporters and said, like, you won't believe the things I've heard already and things like that.
Chairman Kim, are you ready to denuclearize? 그런 의지가 없다고는 여기 오지 않았을 겁니다.
Yeah, I think we've had very, very productive discussions, and the relationship is as good as it's ever been. Better, I think better.
So it just felt like they were both, really set on getting some kind of win out of that summit. So it's pretty shocking that in a matter of a few hours, they would flip the narrative like that.
Right. Now, soon after the breakdown in talks, President Trump, he held a press talk.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that.
미국 측은 용변 지구 핵시설 폐기 조치 외에 한 가지를 더 해야 한다고 끝까지 주장했으며 따라서 미국이 우리의 제안을 수용할 준비가 되어 있지 않다는 것이 명백해져 있습니다.
In your own assessment, was this the biggest stumbling block in their discussions, or do you think there was something else?
Probably the question of sanctions was one of the obstacles. But on the other hand, maybe the North Korean side tried to raise the stakes during the meeting with Trump. And this also was the deal breaker. So maybe they were trying to ask more than they was agreed on the working level before.
Okay. Do you share that thought?
Well, but I would say definitely the sanctions were the deal breaker, because what I'm really wondering is that both sides, they could have found at least like a minimum consent in a solution of, let's say, opening a liaison office, that there would be some outcome and both sides could keep face. On the other hand, you know, like we have two differing accounts, like what North Korea tells about the summit and what the U.S. tells. It's slightly different, but actually not too different. But apparently the U.S. side was not content or was not satisfied with what North Korea offered them, which was a lot. Apparently it was the denuclearization of the Yeongbyeon nuclear complex, but it's of course not everything of the nuclear program. On the other hand, North Korea apparently didn't want every sanction to get lifted, but the 5 major sanctions, which is also not everything, but it's a lot.
일부 해제, 구체적으로는 유엔 제재결의 총 11건 가운데서 2016년부터 17년까지 채택된 5건, 그중에서 민수 경제와 인민생활에 지장을 주는 항목들만 먼저 해제하라는 것입니다.
We get a lot of signs and indicators that North Korea is under pressure to, you know, get sanctions lifted. I think North Korea doesn't have it so easy. I think they don't have too much time.
Again, I am in no rush.
One indicator, for example, is there was a wave of purges by the end of last year, apparently like an anti-corruption measurement, but also it could be a way of the regime getting money from the finance elite of North Korea as a basically desperate attempt to secure some foreign currencies.
Okay. Now, another thing that's been suggested by pundits is that Trump may have been distracted by what's happening back home in the U.S.
I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Trump has long been grappling with suspicions of illicit ties with Russia dating back to his campaign days in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. And many experts say that Cohen's bombshell accusations against Trump was a serious distraction that may have hampered Trump's ability to focus on his summit with Kim Jong-un. What are your thoughts?
You know, I think it's totally possible that it distracted Trump to some extent, but I wouldn't venture to say that it was a meaningful extent and that Cohen's testimony somehow like convinced Trump to walk out of the summit. I think Trump knows that, you know, the narrative around him is really crumbling, and even some of his own voters are starting to turn on him. And so he really needed to come out of the summit with some kind of diplomatic win. And in a way, he didn't do that. So I think, if anything, knowing that the Cohen testimony had just happened, he had more incentive to have this kind of, you know, amazing congratulatory message between North Korea and the United States, and that just wasn't the case.
Watching the President Trump's press conference, you could definitely see that he is sort of irritated with that problem when he was asked the question about Cohen.
He did give a pretty long response regarding that question.
Right. But I think having a fake hearing like that and having it in the middle of this very important summit is really a terrible thing. They could have made it 2 days later or next week, and it would have been even better.
Now, going back to North Korea and their public reaction, in a notable departure from the past, North Korea's state media, they've been quick to keep the public informed in the latest developments regarding this summit.
앞으로도 긴밀히 연계해 나가며 하노이 순회회담에서 논의된 문제 해결을 위한 생산적인 대화들을 계속 이어나가기로 하시었습니다.
However, the fact remains that Chairman Kim Jong-un was unable to negotiate the lifting of sanctions on his country. So how do you think this setback will affect Kim Jong-un's standing back home?
Well, I do not think that would affect really much. We have seen the press conference by North Korean foreign minister, and he partially blamed, the United States for failing there.
미국이 우리의 제안을 수용할 준비가 되어 있지 않다는 것이
If you look at the way that the KCNA has discussed the summit already, it seems to be very much that. They've kind of gleamed over the unfortunate part of the summit and just said, you know, Trump and Kim Jong-un have committed to continuing dialogue and things like that, which is a very positive spin. Granted, it's not necessarily what they're telling their people, but it is interesting that even in the public eye, they're already making this somewhat of a victory.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's why it's really interesting to watch out for the next Rodong Shinmun, the Workers' Party newspaper, which is the most read newspaper by the people. They could easily spin it like, for example, Kim Jong-un was a tough negotiator. He didn't yield an inch from his position, while Trump, made ridiculous demands. He got on his knees and, crawled back to Washington because he lost the negotiations. They could spin it like this because their people are less informed about in the outside world. But on the other hand, you have this outside track of propaganda, which is actually very, very close to what Trump did. KCNA spinned it, said it's a productive meeting. Both sides had good negotiations, which apparently cannot be the case because there was no substantial outcome of the results. But both were trying to sell it as a success and also keeping the spirit high. And I think that makes me at least hopeful that both sides still feel committed to denuclearization.
Right, they're not going back to attacking each other for the time being. Now, despite the two sides being unable to reach an agreement, President Trump, as well as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, did express optimism.
Unfortunately, we didn't get all the way. We didn't get to something that ultimately made sense for the United States of America. I think Chairman Kim was hopeful that we would. We asked him to do more. He was unprepared to do that, but I'm still optimistic.
One of the things, importantly, that Chairman Kim promised me last night is regardless, he's not going to do testing of rockets and nuclear. Not going to do testing. So, I trust him and I take him at his word. I hope that's true.
The presidential office of Cheongwade also said the summit achieved progress in many areas.
두 정상이 오랜 시간 심도 있는 논의를 진행함으로써 서로 상대방의 처지에 대해 이해의 폭과 깊이를 확대한 것으로 평가합니다. 특히 트럼프 대통령이 밝힌 지속적인 대화 의지와 낙관적인 견해는 다음 회담에 대한 전망을 밝게 합니다.
Do you share Blue House's optimism that the two countries can remain good relations going forward?
Well, I do share a little bit of optimism just because it hasn't unraveled into this nasty rhetoric. There seems to be some kind of desire on both North Korea and the United States side to keep some kind of dialogue open. I don't know if I would say that the summit created a lot of progress just in terms of literal deliverables because, quite frankly, it ended early.
Right.
But, it's not exactly wrong to think that there might be still some kind of future for diplomacy.
Shortly after President Trump left Hanoi, he gave a phone call to Moon Jae-in and they talked for about 25 minutes. And President Moon took this opportunity to propose a meeting with Trump in the near future. What kind of important role can President Moon Jae-in play to make sure that the two sides are still engaged in high-level talks and they can keep going forward?
I mean, his key strength is being the mediator between those two sides. For me, the failing Hanoi summit has demonstrated once more how important it is for South Korea to be in the driving role, to be a leading force in that process. So I would advise President Moon to be persistent and actually not change his course. He's committed in that. I think it goes also far beyond like economic cooperation and all those positive side benefits that a cooperation with North Korea could bring. I think it's about his personal vision that's really deep and it's a long-term vision. So I think he should stay on it and not give up, actually. And one more thing, the Blue House actually showed some optimism behind closed doors. I'm sure they were pretty disappointing. And when Moon Jae-in, on the day of the independence movement, gave his speech about the also new economic cooperation with North Korea that he wanted to present, we don't know how his speech would have looked like if the result would have been different. I'm sure that on the night from Thursday to Friday, the Blue House staff was awake pretty long and was rewriting his speech.
Okay, so let's talk about that speech. In commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the March 1st movement for Korea's independence, President Moon Jae-in outlined his vision of a new Korean Peninsula with South Korea in control of its own destiny and leading the process to establish peace.
베트남 하노이에서의 2차 북미 정상회담도 장시간 대화를 나누고 상호 이해와 신뢰를 높인 것만으로도 의미 있는 진전이었습니다. 특히 두 정상 사이에 연락사무소의 설치까지 논의가 이루어진 것은 양국 관계 정상화를 위한 중요한 성과였습니다. 트럼프 대통령이 보여준 지속적인 대화 의지와 낙관적인 전망을 높이 평가합니다. 더 높은 합의로 가는 과정이라고 생각합니다.
However, some critics say the current roadmap for peace on the Korean Peninsula is being threatened amid the breakdown in talks at the second North Korea-U.S. summit. Do you think President Moon Jae-in's roadmap for peace needs a revision or a rethink in light of these aftermath?
No, I actually think that maybe it needs some correction, like in the short term, but generally and strategically thinking, I think it's a good way to establish the peace and the prosperity in the Korean Peninsula as the South Korean side wants. This, I consider the failure of the summit as a tactical slip, it's a tactical mistake. So probably the United States and North Korea would need another couple of months to fix that. We will see the more working level negotiations than maybe a higher level negotiations. And after all, I'm pretty sure that there will be the third summit where and it will be really better prepared than the second one. And we could see some progress there. And in these terms, the South Koreans' vision, the President Moon Jae-in's vision, will go on and in the same, pretty much the same direction as.
Okay, now let's have a look at the regional powers and how they've reacted to the summit. How will the regional powers be affected?
Well, I do not think that there will be any drastic changes after the collapse of the summit. China will continue supporting, and closely cooperating politically with North Korea, because Kim Jong-un met Xi Jinping recently before the summit, and as we can see, after the summit in Singapore, he also went to China to consult with Xi Jinping. So probably they would sit together and try to think of the response and the measures on how to ease the effect, this negative effect, and what to do further. And speaking of Russia, I do not really think that will be affected by this outcome of the summit at all. President Putin's spokesman recently said, after the summit, he said that, of course, Kremlin is a little bit unhappy about the outcome of the summit, but he hopes that the two sides, the North Korea and the United States, will continue dialogue and they will finally come to the agreement. So I think that, as I have already mentioned, that it's not a total failure. The United States and North Korea, they, I guess, still have will to continue talking, and in the final run, we will see some good results.
Okay. Fabian, do you also share the sentiment that perhaps all the regional powers will maintain their status quo?
I mean, from colleagues on the ground, I know that in China the sentiment is, look, we told you denuclearization is something that doesn't happen at one summit, not even at two or three. It takes years to flesh out. So I think China, was more realistic in some way too. As for Japan, let's be honest, Japan is sidelined. They don't play a role actually in that process, and I think you can feel by Abe's reaction that he's a little bit, disappointed that he would actually be more actively involved in that process, but he's not.
Then what about North Korea? What do you think their next action is on the diplomatic front?
You know, the summit, as far as we know, ended with North Korea saying, we'll give you, the dismantlement of this nuclear facility for some sanctions being lifted or all of them. We still don't know what actually happened. And the U.S. saying, no, not good enough. So if either of them budge on what they said at the summit, they're going to look weak and like they're the one that doesn't have the leverage in the situation. So diplomatically speaking, I think North Korea's best move might be to somehow, get close with China. They've been working on that certainly in the past few months, if not year. And on the United States front, there's a lot of issues with China right now, but in some way they need to find these other regional powers or parties that are somewhat extraneously involved and try to sway them to their side, because it's clear that neither side is going to suddenly change what they said at the summit.
Okay. Now, despite what happened at the summit, Kim Jong-un, he did manage to get a first-hand look at the economic developments in Vietnam, with the country serving as a potential model for North Korea's future economic reforms. On February 27th, Kim Jong-un's close aides visited Ha Long Bay and the northern industrial city of Hai Phong, long seen as Vietnam's manufacturing hub and a symbol of its rapid economic development. Do you think Chairman Kim and his aides learned about the economic developments in Vietnam and how they can be implemented to North Korea?
Yeah, I hope so. But I get the feeling from conversations with North Koreans, that they're quite proud and also nationalistic. And ironically, even though Vietnam is by far more economically developed than North Korea, I think many North Koreans, especially the elite, doesn't actually want to be compared to a country from Southeast Asia. I think in their own hierarchical system, they see themselves as superior in some sense. And by just looking at the facts, North Korea, if they would implement the changes that Vietnam has done, they have one advantage that every country almost every country would be really jealous. Their geolocation. Yeah. They have China as neighbor, they have Russia as neighbor, they have South Korea as neighbor, and Japan is not far either. Basically the strong households of whole Asia are cornered around North Korea. So I think they would really have a rapid development really fast if they would open up.
And do you also share that belief in North Korea's economic potential?
Yeah, they definitely have the potential. And what is more interesting that previously I have heard that the North Koreans, speaking about the economic development of the country, they didn't like the Chinese way. So they wanted to shift the development on the basis of Vietnam experience. And I heard that 2 or 3 years ago. And maybe after his aides could see personally what's the results of the economic development in Vietnam, maybe they would shift even more, they would lean even more towards this model, to Vietnamese model.
Now, time now for our last question. In your forecast, when do you think we can expect to see the third Pyongyang-Washington summit?
Oh, that's highly speculative, but I would bet that probably we will see the next inter-Korean summit before actually Trump and Kim meet again. But I hope, really hope that they will meet soon, but not, of course, not too much in a rush. They have to flesh out the details, because if the next U.S.-North Korea summit will also be a failure, if there will be no results, then at least, for example, in South Korea, people will get increasingly annoyed by this approachment process. They will lose patience with North Korea. And also, I think the danger or the risk of getting back to a military confrontation course will also be increasing. So I really hope the next summit will be soon and will be a success.
I have no idea when it's going to happen, but I think, we kind of saw at the summit that maybe the two sides weren't as prepared as they should be, and it's been 8 months since the last Trump-Kim summit. Trump has said it could be a short time, it could be a long time, but the thing is, we don't know whether he thinks 8 months was short or long.
Right.
I think fundamentally, if you just simplify these negotiations for a second, it's a lot like, you know, bringing down the price at a market. You start here, and then you have your price B, C, D, E, and F. And it seems like at the summit, they didn't have those backup plans and those backup scenarios. So hopefully, you know, they can regroup, and next time they'll have that. And I would imagine it's going to take quite some time.
All right, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The second North Korea-U.S. summit took a rather unexpected turn as the two sides failed to reach an agreement. However, President Trump remained optimistic and pledged to maintain good relations with North Korea, leaving the door open to future discussions. Despite the disappointing results, let's hope it's only a minor speed bump and part of the growing pains of lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. That's all we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.